Hello and welcome to another Sprues and Brews unboxing. Today we've got a really exciting one because we're opening up the Kingdom of Bretonnia edition of the Warhammer The Old World starter box. So first of all, massive thanks to Games Workshop for sending us an early copy to review for free. Yeah, really looking forward to this one. Obviously the Old World has been coming for a couple of years now as a way of bringing back Warhammer Fantasy Battles, so your big battles with square bases, ranked units, and the Old World is essentially a new edition of that game. It's his own game in effect, rather than being just 8th edition coming back. So there's quite a few rules that are different. It's got a bit of a kind of best of the old parts of all the old editions of the game. So they've done things a little bit differently this time round, where traditionally Games Workshop tend to do big starter boxes with 2 factions in and the rulebook and all your dice and everything. This time round they are releasing 2 separate boxes. They cost £155 each. There's one box for the Kingdoms of Bretonnia, and then there's another box for the Tomb Kings. Each of these basically contain a 1250 point army and the core book, and then all your templates and dice and everything. So we've been sent the Bretonnian one. What we're going to be doing in this video is cracking open the box, seeing all the kits that we get in there, seeing how they go together, and then we're going to be having a full deep dive into the rulebook as well. So unfortunately I'm only unboxing this about a week before this is due up on the day that you're watching it, so I'm not going to have time to get these all painted up. What I am going to do though is do a bit of a Tale of Gamers video as well, where I show the progress on the contents of this box. Admittedly most of the contents are old models as well. They're the old 2003 Bretonnians, but we do have the awesome character on the Pegasus, so we'll have a look at that. I am going to have all these built for the end of the video as well, so I can show you kind of what you get in the box and how they stack up and the scale of the new kit compared to the other ones. But the focus of this video really is going to be on the rules. We've had the rules in digital format for a couple of weeks now, and we've played some games, so we're going to be talking about how the game is different from the previous edition, what we like, what we don't like, how army construction works, how big an average army is, all the cool stuff that you want to know about the Old World. Also up to date, I've got another couple of videos. We've got one on the modular movement trays, we've got one on all the cards they're releasing alongside this, and we've also got an unboxing of the Paladin Battle Standard Bearer on Pegasus, and as ever there's going to be a big old post on spruesandbrews.com with all this in written format too. So without further ado, should we have a look at this absolutely ginormous box? If I turn it to its side, I think it's a little bit deeper than the Horus Heresy Age of Darkness box. It is a massive heavy thing, and £155 seems a bargain to me for it. If we flip it onto its back, like I say, in here you get the core rule book and you get an entire army as well, so there's a lot of stuff in there. With the Tomb Kings one you get the cool dragon mounted Lich Priest. For the Bretonnians they get the new Duke on Royal Pegasus, so you can either make a Baron or a Duke with this one, and you've got all the weapon options as well. So that's really cool. There's a brand new HQ unit. You get an absolute host of men-at-arms. You get some bowman, 12 knights and 3 Pegasus Knights as well. So like I say, that builds around 1250 points, which is a good start for an army. Considering I think the core book separately is going to be going for about £40. Essentially that means you get this whole army for £115. At the time of filming this, I don't know if this is something they're going to do for all the other factions when they come out. So the initial release is just going to be Bretonnians and Tomb Kings. There's rules for everything in the 2 kind of army list books that are coming out alongside this. But miniatures wise, the initial release is going to focus on the Bretonnians and Tomb Kings. So there is a possibility that we get something like this for the other factions, or a start collecting style box. But yeah, for day one, if you've got old armies, awesome. If you're new into this, you've really got the Bretonnians and the Tomb Kings that you've got miniatures that you can buy for it. But yeah, I mean, I'm certainly going to be picking up the Tomb King box as well to do a couple of big forces. So, if we flip this over again, big old box. Like I say, the majority of the kits in here are dated 2003, so these are the old Bretonnian kits, but they still look really good today. So load of stuff in there. So we move this out of the way. First of all, we get our kind of gaming material. So we've got our whippy sticks. It basically lets you play with this as an army out of the box, which is handy. You've got little rulers there. You've also got a sprue of blast templates as well. So these are for your like trebuchets and your breath weapons and stuff. You've got all those in there. So a lot of people that play 40k probably won't have these. Some old school players might have some kicking around, but it's handy that they're included in the box. Jumping in here, we get a load of stuff. Now I noticed that we've got, it looks like the Bretonnian Knight horses and the Pegasus Knight parts bagged separately. Now I can't remember how these came back in the day. Maybe they were just loose in the box in pairs like this with the head separate. But we've got, I don't know if there's different designs for these. Maybe they're just in pairs. But yeah, you get presumably the 12 needed here to build the knights in the box. Yep, 12 horse bodies there, bagged individually. And we also get a bag here with, it looks like horse heads and Pegasus wings as well. So we've got 3 sets of wings, 3, 6, 9, 12 heads as well. I think there's a bit of variation in the poses of them, so you've got some different kind of styles for them. But interestingly, they're bagged separately. I think they must have just come loose in the boxes back in the day. So what we'll do, if we dig out some of the new stuff first, it looks like this is the new Pegasus Knight, the hero. So the way they've done the heroes for the old world is very reminiscent of how they've done the tanks for Horus Heresy. So what you get is essentially a monster kit, so the Pegasus itself, as its own frame, and then the hero comes on its own separate sprue, which means that they're able to reuse this monster sprue with different builds of hero on the top of it. So yeah, I mean, that is a really, really nice looking kit. And I suspect this is the same frame that's going to come in the Paladin box, and then you have a unique frame here then for the Duke. And like I say, you've got a few different options on here of how you build this guy. So you've got a body there with a sword, you've got a lance down there, which should give you a few spare parts as well if you want to customise any characters too. Obviously your heroes are a bit more modular in the old world, in that you can give them magic items and different gear and stuff compared to a more kind of rigid build that you get in games like Age of Sigmar. So yeah, really, really nice kit. So that's the only new kit that's in this box. Everything else in here are existing kits. So we've got 12 Bretonnian Knights on horse. So we've got those there. 3 of those, will be another 3 in the box somewhere. We've got some command sprues here for the men-at-arms, it looks. And again, these are older kits, so you'll notice there's a lot of space, you know, on the frames compared to what we're used to now. But they're still decent kits. These look like they might actually be the command sprue for the archers, but I wonder if they're actually universal and they're used for both the men-at-arms and the archers. That is a possibility there. So we've got 3 of those frames. We've also got frames for the men-at-arms themselves, and again there's 1, 2, 3, 4 there, 5, 6, 7 sprues of 4 guys. So if we move them there and have a quick nosy at them, again they're fairly kind of simple to build, these, with very few parts. So the body and the legs are all one part, and then you pop on the head and the weapons, really. So yeah, fairly straightforward to build these, so they shouldn't take too long to work on them. We then have a whole stack of frames for the archers as well. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 frames of 4 guys. So that's 20 there plus the command sprue. So again, not a bad assortment. And again, these are very basic to put together. You've just got the heads to pop on them, and then you've got some of the defensive lines. You can build like stakes that kind of give them a bonus when they get charged. So we get a whole stack of them. We then have, this looks like it's a command sprue for the knights maybe. Yeah. So we've got the knights here. Again, they're really, really nice looking. Yeah, they're cool. I think they're the Bretonnian Knights, please. Maybe the first frames that we looked at then were the Pegasus Knights, maybe, because they had the horses on them. So you get 3 of them in the box, and then you get enough here to build 6 Bretonnian Knights of the Realm. So we've got 12 of Knights of the Realm, sorry. So 3 sprues of 4, and each sprue of 4 has got your command options on too. So you could build it as a big unit of 12 if you wanted. Equally, you could build, like, you know, 2 units of 6. So I think the minimum for cavalry, if I remember rightly, is 3+. So you could take 3 little units of 4, but really for your lance bonus, you want those kind of 6-man blocks. So yeah, that is all the models in the box, and there's an awful lot. And obviously we do get some paper material in here too. So we've got the core rulebook, which we'll be looking at in a little while. We're going to, you know, after we've done this part of the video, we'll go through this full rulebook, and it is a big chunky tome. So let's pop that to one side for now. We also get some paper material in here too. So we pop that out. We've got bases for all the stuff. And again, we'll be going through the base sizes when we go through the instructions. There's some new base sizes in here too, like the 30 by 60mm cavalry bases. We are going to have write-ups of all of the faction rules. So, you know, we've got what base sizes everything's in on the game, so we'll be talking about that in a separate video. You also get a load of dice. You get a scatter dice, but what you don't get in here is an artillery dice. Now, some people have assumed that that means that it's not in the game. That's not the case. Cannons still use artillery dice, so you will need to buy one separately if you want to use that. It is odd that it doesn't come in here. If I had to guess, it'd be that Games Workshop are selling boxes of dice separately with a scatter dice in there. Sorry, an artillery dice in there, but it's not included in this box. So if you are playing Bretonnians in particular, you probably will want one. Well, I suppose Bretonnians aren't going to use them because they haven't got any cannons. But if you're looking to play Empire or something, you want to pick them up. There's a big wad of 25mm bases as well, which all the infantry are on. And then we do also get a new Bretonnian transfer sheet too. And there's some really nice transfers on here for your knights. So yeah, I'm looking forward to getting these on the models. So yeah, what we'll do now is have a look at the core rules and see how we play Warhammer The Old World. Before we jump into the core rules though, try and have a look at the assembly instructions, because there's some interesting stuff included in here too. So obviously we get all the instructions on how to build all the models. Now again, they're fairly basic to build, they're older kits. The Knights of the Realm you can either build as Knights of the Realm or Knights Errant as well, so you've got some options there. Knights Errant, if you do build one of the optional factions out of the Arcane Journal, you can build a full knight army if you want to. In that, you get to unlock like the Grail Reliquary and Battle Pilgrims as a kind of a core choice. You have to take a unit of Knight Errant per 1,000 points, I think, but it lets you do a full kind of like cavalry list, which is really cool. So you do get parts on here to be able to represent each different build of knights, which is fun. And then the Pegasus Knights was that first sprue that we looked at, with the heads and the wings going in there separately. And you've got a couple of different options for the heads on them. Again, like we said, the peasantry are really, really easy to build. There's not many options there. And you've got the little stakes to build. So these should go together really, really quickly. Now onto the new character. This is going to be a bit more of a complex build because obviously it's a newer kit, and you have got the option of building the Duke or the Baron as well. So I don't think that you get enough parts to be able to have it interchangeable between the two of them. You might be able to do something with the magnets, but looking at this, I think the parts are shared between the two builds. But you know, if you are particularly interested in swapping them out, there's always stuff that you can do with magnets. So this looks a bit of a more complex build for it. So yeah, take your time when you're building this one. Yeah, so lots of options on that. Now what is cool is that in the assembly instructions for this, and presumably the Tomb King box as well, you do get a full pre-written 1250 point army list in here as well, with all of the profiles and rules and the point values too. So even if you haven't bought the army book with all the profiles in, you do get the full kind of profiles and points in here, which is really nice. That you can play with these straight out of the box, which is pretty ace. You also get all your army special rules and stuff like the lance formation as well. So yeah, I really like that. I think that's a really good idea, and I hope this is something we see in future boxes as well. So let's dig through the core rulebook for Warhammer The Old World and see what's inside. Now unfortunately, between writing this section and filming it, I've come down with a horrific cold, so apologies, I'm a bit nasally here. But yeah, I was really excited going through this book to see what was in here, because obviously this is a kind of best of all of the old editions of Warhammer Fantasy, and obviously we know some armies were being supported and some weren't, so it was quite exciting going into this book to see, you know, what was going to be included, how the game was going to work, and what factions were featured in the lore. Now first of all, I want to say there's some absolutely great shots of armies here, with a very retro vibe. You know, we've got a flocked board, we've got scenery converted up out of the old fortified manor house, which I really hope is coming back at some point. I'm hoping they do a made to order of it maybe, and even some old kind of like model railroad scale trees. It just feels like those pictures that you got in White Dwarf years and years ago when we first got into the game. So yeah, really good first impression. Now the first, 80 pages of this book are dedicated to lore. Now obviously we know that the current time setting of the old world is a little while ahead of where we were at, you know, the end times and Warhammer Fantasy Battle, but we get quite an in-depth look back through the history of the old world, going right back to the time of dragons, and then the old ones coming, and all through history. So obviously there's some mentions to some of those non-core factions in here, like the lizard men, like the dark elves. So it's really nice to see kind of that backstory built up. Moving into the current time period, we learn quite a bit about all the different factions that are represented as core factions as well. And there's some surprises here that people might not be expecting based on the supported factions within the setting. So obviously we learn about all the different factions. We learn about the various kind of like tribes of men. We learn about the orcs and all the adversaries. So it's really good to be able to kind of dig into the lore of what's happening in this age, the kind of civil war that's happening in the Empire, and where everybody's up to at that point in time. Now I believe that these are going to get expanded further in the Arcane Journal releases, which are an optional supplemental book for your army. We're going to be covering them in the coming weeks between now and release, but essentially to play an army you just need either Ravening Hordes or Forces of Fantasy. The Arcane Journals are basically supplemental books that have lore for the army, and then they also have some more kind of niche alternative builds. So one example is the Tomb Kings have a full chariot list, and the Bretonnians have a full kind of cavalry errantry crusade force, along with their special characters. So I've seen a lot of people saying that you need to buy 3 books to play Games of the Old World. You absolutely don't. The
the stuff in the Arcane Journal is really going to appeal more to narrative players. If you're a tournament player, quote marks, really all you need is Ravening Hordes or Forces of Fantasy, so don't worry about that. And obviously we saw, if you just want to play with the models in this box as well, you do get the full army lists. So loads and loads of lore to kind of sink your teeth into. I was worried that we'd be a little bit light on lore with, the time period shifting, but this brings us right up to date. Now, what is really interesting in this book is that it's not just the core armies mentioned, because there's another 2 armies that were mentioned way back at the start of the coverage for the Old World that people were worried had disappeared, and that is Kislev, who get a full kind of write-up in here, and Grand Cathay as well. So I'm fully expecting both of those armies to be part of the game. I think the reason why they've not been announced in that initial lineup is because people haven't got existing armies for them. So, I do suspect in the future we'll see a full supplement for these 2 armies and full model ranges for them as well. But I think that's going to be, far off into the horizon after we've had these initial, supported armies featured. So that's really exciting, and I can't wait to see what they do with those 2 forces. Obviously we've seen them in Warhammer Total War as well, so it's awesome that they are represented in here. So moving on to the part that everyone's most interested in now, the rules themselves. And like I said earlier, this is kind of like an amalgamation of the best parts of all previous editions of Warhammer Fantasy. I would say with that, if you're a veteran 8th edition player, make sure you do give the rulebook a thorough read, because there's quite a few principles and things that are different than the previous game. And when we were playing a few practice games, we made some assumptions based on the old edition of the game, and some things have changed quite a lot in some cases. Now you've still got units, they all still have they work the same way, they've got the same stat lines and stuff. So in some previous editions of the game, you couldn't just measure because you were guessing how far your cannon would fire and stuff. That's not a thing anymore, you can measure at any time. We still have artillery and scatter dice. I know some people were worried that they weren't included because the artillery dice isn't in the Kingdom of Bretonnia box, for example. But again, none of the models within that box make use of that, so that's probably why they've not included it. But that is still very much a thing, and cannons still work the same way, where you choose how far they're going to fire, roll the dice to see how far it bounces, and then roll the dice again to see how far it goes after that. So all those principles work very much the same way, which is good to see. We still have templates as well. That has gone back and forth a few times over the editions, but essentially the fully covered models are completely hit, and they've got a 50-50 chance of anything that's partially covered by a template. So that makes life easier. You do get the templates in the box for that as well. Like I say, all the stat line is the same as we're used to. Some things work a little bit differently, as we'll go through the rules later on, like initiative is very, very important now. Also, your unit type is important. We'll see these as we go through the book later, but your unit type will determine how many ranks you need to get a rank bonus, and how many ranks you can claim as well from a bonus, because that's not set in stone either. Now, there's a few different formations that we have in addition to those that we had in Warhammer Fantasy. The main one that we've got is close order formation, and this is your traditional block of troops touching bases. And these now come in 2 different flavours. You've got combat order, where you are wider than you are deep. This means that you're able to have a rank bonus and a combat resolution bonus. If you deploy the other way round, so you're deeper than you are wide, you no longer can claim a rank bonus, but instead when you march you move triple movement, which is handy for getting across the battlefield. What's good with this is that some units are allowed a free reform before they move. So, you can maybe start the first turn deployed in marching column, and then use the first turn to get into position, and then in your second turn reform into combat order, ready to either receive a charge or to go into combat yourself. So I quite like that. Now, obviously, units are a little bit bigger because base sizes are a little bit bigger, but as we'll see later on, we're talking like a +2 maximum rank bonus for a lot of unit types. So I don't think we're going to see those massive units that we had in 8th edition. You know, horde, there is a horde rule, but it doesn't work the same way, so there's no reward for having a massively wide unit. So I think blocks of like 18 for elite troops or 20 or 24 for kind of like mainstay blocks is probably going to be the norm, rather than massive blocks of like 30, 40 models. I don't think that's going to be a thing. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see what kind of unit sizes people gravitate towards, but I think that it's probably going to be on the smaller end, probably in line with the boxes that they're selling. Like, for example, the upcoming Foot Knights are in a box of 20, and that's probably a good unit for them. You might have them 6 wide and 3 deep and take in a unit of 18 of them. It'd be a pretty good way to deploy them, or a 5x4 block, for example. So I don't think we're going to see those massive units that we used to back in the day. Now, one big change is in models that are removed. So if somebody's killed in combat, you still remove them from the back ranks because somebody stepped forward, but those models that step forward cannot fight, which makes initiative very, very important in this game. If you manage to go in and kill, say somebody's got 5 wide, and you kill 3 models, that means only 2 models are going to be able to fight back against you. Which means that when you're receiving the charge, you want to make use of your armour, you want to make use of ward saves if you've got them, to try and weather that charge. And when you are charging, you want to try and do as much damage as you can to minimise the damage that's coming back to you. Now, as we'll see, there's quite a few changes for falling back, which makes combat, I suppose, losing combat less, I guess, disruptive to you than it used to be. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see what kind of weapons people take because of that as well. So we see here a bit of a look at the different unit types, and there's quite a lot now. Infantry is split into regular and heavy infantry, with regular infantry needing a rank of 5 models to get a rank bonus, with a maximum rank bonus of 2. So if you've got 2 full ranks of 5, you get your maximum rank bonus. Any additional ranks that you have on top of that, there's no bonus, there's no benefit. I mean, I suppose the only benefit is that the enemy needs to kill more models until you lose that rank bonus. Now, there is a horde rule that is on your kind of the units that you'd expect to be bigger. So goblins, for example, have the horde rule. And all this means is that they are allowed to claim an additional rank bonus on top. So goblins, for example, could have a maximum 3 rank bonus. So it's dead easy. Heavy infantry only need 4 models per rank. So again, you might, like the old Chaos Warriors, I think, came in boxes of 16, so you could do 4x4 blocks with them. Or equally, you could keep them in 5 blocks, and it just means that the enemy has to kill an additional model to negate your rank bonus. And again, monstrous infantry, they go 3 wide with a maximum rank bonus of 2. All cavalry only have a maximum rank bonus of 1, so just that initial rank for cavalry is going to matter. And again, monstrous are 3 wide, heavy are 4 wide, and light are 5 wide. So that will affect your kind of formations and stuff. The main kind of thing to take away here is that your maximum rank bonus is going to be a lot less than it was back in Warhammer Fantasy. It's not less important, but it's harder to achieve. One of the things that I was worried about going to the old world was that magic was going to be very different. I had a fear that it was maybe just going to be passive buffs, you know, reroll auras around your wizard or something. That's not the case. Magic exists in a different form, but still in a fun form. So in 8th edition previously, you had a pool of dice that you spent to cast your spells. That's now gone. Instead, you have a number of spells, and you'll be able to cast those spells in different phases of the game. In order to cast them, you roll 2d6 and add your wizard level. You've got to beat the target equal or beat the target value of the spell in order for it to go off. So very similar to what we've had before, very similar to how things work in like Age of Sigmar, for example. So while there is a reward for having high level wizards, because you're getting a bonus to the dice roll, there is an argument in the old world to actually take multiple low level wizards. The way spell generation works is that for every spell that your wizard knows, you will randomly generate one, and then you can swap one spell for either your signature spell in your lore or most of the army lists have their own spell lore, so Wood Elves have the lore of Athel Loren. So you could choose to swap one of your randomly generated spells for one spell off that list. So say, for example, if you wanted to have, all those spells from the lore of Athel Loren, it might be worth taking 2 or 3 level 1 wizards and just swapping out that rolled spell for one of those to give you a little bit more of control on what spells that you've got. The fact that spells trigger in different phases of the game as well gives you a lot more options. Dispelling also works similarly. So you roll 2d6, add your wizard level, and if you beat it, you've stopped the spell, which is awesome. Now, wizards have got a maximum dispel range. Level 1 and 2 have got an 18-inch range. Level 3 and 4 have got a 24-inch range. There is a downside to attempting a dispel. There's no limit to the number of spells that each wizard can dispel. They can try and dispel everyone if they want to. However, on a double 6, you always dispel a spell. You've beaten them in a magical duel, which is good if you're coming up against, like, say a level 4 wizard rolls a 10, you'd need a 14 to beat it. If you roll a double 6, you just stop the spell, which is cool. If, however, you roll a double 1 for your dispel, you have to roll on the miscast chart. So that basically represents the opponent wizard beating you in this magical duel, and it makes it a decision whether you want to dispel something, because there is always that chance that something goes horrifically wrong. And like with the previous edition of the game, miscasts are really nasty. Obviously you can suffer a miscast if you do the same when you're casting a spell as well, but yeah, the risk exists there for dispelling them too. So that's pretty cool. I quite like how it works. Now there's another type of dispel that exists in the game, a fated dispel. So if you have no wizards in range, or if maybe you don't have any wizards at all, once per turn you could do a fated dispel. So this has no maximum range. You can dispel whatever spell you want on the table, and you don't add any wizards level to them. It's just a straight 2d6, but you only get once per turn. So obviously, with there being spells in different phases of the game, it's weighing up at what point you want to use that fated dispel. So again, really nice mechanic. I quite like that. It means that even if you're in a kind of a low magic army, you have still got a way of stopping those powerful spells, but obviously it's less likely than stopping them with a wizard. So yeah, I think that's really, really fun, and I was quite worried about how magic was going to be in the game, so the fact that it is still a bit of a magical duel and you've got the rolling element, and there's some really cool effects in there as well. None of them seem like game-breakingly good. Like in 8th edition, you could, 6 dice cacophonic choir and cause a load of harm for a dwarf army. There's going to be less instances like that, but there's still powerful buffs and offensive spells and stuff that you can cast. So yeah, really like it. Now the turn sequence has changed a little bit in how the game works. We start off with the strategy phase, and in here some models will have command abilities. Now we're not talking like Age of Sigmar levels where every hero's got one. They are fairly rare. So for example, a Beast Lord can blow his horn in the command phase to allow your reserves to reroll when they're coming on. Some armies might not have any command abilities at all, but they do trigger within this phase. You then get to cast conjuration spells, and these essentially are your buffs and debuffs. They go off on this phase to make your units stronger or make enemy units weaker. You then get to rally fleeing units, and again, that's familiar to old players, the kind of stuff that you do in the kind of tidy up phase of the game. Moving on to the movement phase, again, there's a lot here that's very similar to classic Warhammer. You declare all your charges first. So people who've played previous editions of Warhammer Fantasy will know what I often do is just put 2 dice next to the unit that I say that's going to charge. You go through all your charges, and then your opponent goes through all their charge reactions. So they might want to just hold and take the charge. They might want to stand and shoot, unleashing a volley on the unit that's coming through them. They might also want to flee. If it's a long charge and they think they can get away without getting run down, that might be an option as well. And there are a few unique charge reactions that some of the units can do as well. So feigned flight, or shoot and flee, or cavalry, heavy cavalry can kind of do I forget what it's called, cavalry charge, where they kind of meet the charge with their own charge and counters charging. So there's really fun stuff that can be done there. Charging itself is now based on your movement value, and then you roll 2d6, you take the highest one, and that is how far you've charged. So something with movement 6, for example, could charge between 7 and 12 inches. And the maximum distance you can charge is always based on your movement plus 6. So if you, let's use the movement 6 example, you can only declare a charge on something that's 12 inches away. Again, there are some rules that overwrite that. So Swift Stride, for example, adds 3 inches on top of that to your maximum charge rate, and then you get an additional d6 modifier for the charge. So while your maximum charge distance is only increased by 3, you could potentially charge further. So yeah, it's pretty cool. It gives you more reliable charges, and it lets you, I guess it gives you a bit more control and lets you set up those charges. You're less likely to fall foul of a really bad charge roll, because if you are movement 6, you know that if you can get within 7 inches, you are going to make that charge. So yeah, I quite like that change. Now for actually doing all your other movement and stuff, once you've declared those charges, you've completed them, all your other army moves as normal. Random moves at the end, again, squigs and the like, random dice roll for those random movement units as well. They can move into combat from that move if that random charge is far enough, because those random units cannot declare a charge themselves. The way movement works for kind of wheeling and turning and stuff, again, is very familiar to, you know, any old school Warhammer Fantasy players. So your unit will kind of wheel. So in this example here, it will pivot on that point, and you'd measure that distance there. That goes off your movement. You then move forward another couple of inches and then wheel the other way. So all these little wheels will add up and kind of be deducted from your movement. Likewise, you can do some different formation changes as well, and they tend to reduce your movement, or use, say, half or a quarter of your movement if you want to sidestep or back up, or even redress the ranks. You might want to move into a more favourable formation. And again, there are special rules in here that allow some units to do these before moving too. For charges, you are allowed to make an initial wheel before you move in, but you have to pay for that initial wheel from your charge move. So say, for example, I don't know, your movement 6 and you've rolled a 4 and a 1, that means you could charge 10 inches. In this example here, that initial wheel would cost you a couple of inches movement. You then move forward, and then you get a free kind of close the door move. So it's really just that initial wheel and getting in contact with the enemy that you need to worry about. It could be, if you've got a particularly wide wheel to make, you're going to need a high charge in order to get in. You can make that wheel at any point during your move as well. So if there's like scenery and stuff in the way, it does give you a bit of freedom to kind of, I guess, move around it and get into position. But the key thing is really your unit's aiming to maximise the number of models in contact. Again, similar to how it worked in Warhammer Fantasy. And again, for rear and flank charges, that's based on like where the majority of the unit is sitting. So you see in this example here, more of the units in the flank. So that's really how you determine how they sit. Some of them, you know, it's going to be on the edge, and you might need to just kind of work out where they sit. But in most cases, it's going to be fairly obvious where the unit's sitting. There are little doodads you can get to work out like the kind of majority, but in most cases it's going to be fairly straightforward. So yeah, so on the whole, charging is you know, very similar to how it used to be. Movement in general, anyone who's played you know, Warhammer Fantasy will be familiar with how it works. Now fleeing is a little bit different, because there's different types of kind of falling back. So previously, if you lost a combat, or you were shot at and had to flee, you would flee and then you'd have a chance of rallying in the future. We'll see later on in the combat rules that there's now 3 different degrees of falling back. There's giving ground, which means your unit technically doesn't free, it just shuffles back a couple of inches, ready to receive the charge again. You can fall back in good order, which means that you flee, but then you get a free rally, so your unit turns around straight away, which also means that they can't get cut down. And then there's a traditional flee, where you run away, and there's a chance the enemy unit can run them down and destroy them. So all that is cool. It gives you some different degrees of failure in combat. Like I say, it more represents the back and forth of units fighting over the ground, rather than just turn one unit scarpers and runs away. We'll see how that works as we get to the combat phase, but essentially it's based on the difference between the base leadership and the modified leadership based on your panic roll. In the movement phase as well, there's also, I forget what they're called, but there's spells that can be used to move units too. Moving on to the shooting phase, this again is very familiar to old players of Warhammer. You pick a unit, you pick a target, you roll to hit, you roll to wound, they make an armour save, and then potentially, if you kill enough, you might force a panic test. So yeah, really, really straightforward. This works very much the same way, with your ballistic skill being modified by firing at long range, for example, moving and shooting things like behind cover. Because of these cumulative modifiers, there might be situations where you need a 7, 8 or 9 to hit, in which cases, dead easy, you roll a 6 first, followed by another number in order to hit that higher target. So really, really straightforward. With to wound rolls, there's a chance that some weapons aren't going to be strong enough to actually injure some targets. So if you look at the lower end of the strength bar, a level 3 weapon won't be able to wound anything toughness 9 or higher, which makes sense. We will see in combat later on, hitting in combat's a bit more forgiving, but for actually wounding, yeah, your strength really does matter there. You then make armour saves as normal, and that is modified by the weapon's AP, armour penetration stat. Now, in previous editions of the game, your strength modified the AP. That doesn't exist anymore. Instead, each weapon has its own innate AP, and then there's other rules that sit on top of that, such as there's a rule where if you get a wound of a 6, for example, it will increase the armour penetration by 1. And rules like that do stack. So you could have a weapon that has that rule, and then a unit that has that rule as well, which means that if they rolled a 6 to wound, they'd increase the AP by 2. So where you've got some particularly powerful weapons like great weapons, they are very, very good at doing this. But obviously you've got side effects for that as well. As we'll see in a bit, initiative's a big deal. So it's weighing up what units are going to be armed with what weapons in order to fulfill certain tasks on the battlefield, and thinking about what units want to be receiving charges and what units want to be doing it. Now, in addition to an armour save, there's also the concept of ward saves as well. Ward saves are never modified, but they can always be taken after an armour save. So it's essentially a second save to kind of shrug the damage. They are, decent ward saves are fairly rare. So you're talking like 6+, 5+ ward saves really. We've not got, re-rollable 2+ saves with 2+ ward saves or anything ridiculous like that. It's also worth noting as well that armour saves can't get any better than a 2+ save as well. In previous editions of Warhammer, you could have some very, very powerful saves that could only really be, negated by very powerful AP. That's not a thing anymore in this edition of the game. And obviously, like we mentioned earlier, you remove casualties from the back of the unit, and if you cause enough, you can cause panic tests, which could potentially cause them to either flee or fall back in good order. Now, moving on to the combat phase, this is another area where the game has seen quite some big changes compared to previous editions of the game. So, the first biggie is that every model on the first rank gets to fight. So if you do want to go like super wide units, all of them can attack, but the thing worth noting is that any models not in base contact only get a single attack. Likewise, any models that are fighting to the side as well, so say if a unit charged in here, these models could fight, but they'd only get a single attack each against them. In the grand majority of cases, only the first rank can fight as well. With the old Horde rule not existing anymore, it is rare for models to be able to fight in multiple ranks. Now there are some weapons that allow you to do them, Spears, for example, there's now 2 different types of spears. Throwing spears means that you can fight in 2 ranks on the charge, and thrusting spears means you can fight in 2 ranks when you are charged, and those thrusting spears actually increase your initiative by 1 as well. So again, goes down to equipping weapons for different roles, but really it's just going to be that first rank fighting. Now, initiative is really, really important here, because we mentioned earlier, with the step up rule changing, any slain models do not get to fight. So you want to be striking, before your opponent, to give charges a kind of, I guess, an incentive to charge and a bonus. You get a bonus to your initiative for each inch of the charge that you make, up to a maximum of 3. So basically that means if somebody makes a charge of at least 3 inches, they get +3 to their initiative. Now, there's a few rules in the past that modified your initiative. So always strikes last always used to mean that you'd fight last regardless. In the old world, always strikes last instead changes your unmodified leadership to 1. Because it's your unmodified leadership, it means that it still gets increased by things such as the charge bonus. So a weapon with always strikes last on the charge, who charges at least 3 inches, will actually fight at the initiative 4 step, which means that those great weapons potentially could be fighting before the opponent, or at least fighting at the same time. Equally, always strikes first weapons always strike at the initiative 10 step, which means that if somebody with initiative 7 charges a unit with always strikes first, they would essentially both be fighting at the initiative 10 step, meaning that they both fight at the same time. So those are important changes to striking last or striking first, because it means that it's never a guarantee that you're going to be first or last. And there are some situations where you might be fighting at the same time, or like we mentioned with charging with always strikes last, you might even attack first. And I think that's going to be a big consideration to what weapons that you give your units and who you decide to charge. If you've got a bit of an anvil unit, you probably want them to be equipped with, armour and shields to be able to take that charge so that you can fight back. If you've got them equipped with great weapons and they're fighting at, initiative 1, there's a good chance that the majority of the unit's going to be dead, or the majority of the rank's going to be dead, so it can't retaliate, and you're probably going to lose that combat. But obviously with the changes to falling back, that might not necessarily be a problem. Yes, you might lose that fight, but if you fall back in good order, your unit might just run back and be ready to charge again in their turn. So there's lots of things to consider here, and I think it makes for a more exciting and back and forth in combat. Now I mentioned that the 2-hit wound. Now I mentioned that the 2-hit chart in combat is a lot more forgiving than in games like the Horus Heresy. And you can see here that the worst value that you can hit on is a 5. Which means that even if you're, a weapon skill 1 snotling fighting a greater demon, there's always a chance that you can hit. You're going to be hitting on 5s, but there's always a chance. When you go the other way, high weapon skill against low weapon skill, there's, you're hitting on 2s most of the time if you're fighting something that's kind of worse weapon skill than you. And again, this comes back to the back and forth of initiative. If you've got a terrible unit but you manage to get the strike first, and there's a 1 in 3 chance that you can hit, there's always the potential that your rubbish unit can do something. If they don't kill what they're fighting, they're probably going to die horrifically, but there's always that chance, again, leading to some more exciting battles. And I guess in close combat there's less of those fights where you're going to lose, because you've always got a chance here, which is good. The wound chart matches what we've got for shooting, and again, armour saves work the same way as well. Once you've done all the fighting, everyone who can fight has done, you then calculate the combat result. Again, much like old Warhammer Fantasy, this is based on wounds caused in combat, how many rank bonus you've got, bearing in mind the much reduced maximum rank bonus that you've got in the old world, whether you've got a standard or a battle standard, whether you fought in the flank or the rear, if you're on higher ground, and you also get an additional wound for each overkill that you do. So if you do damage in excess of what you can deal to a target, you get a bonus for them as well. And essentially the side with the highest result wins that fight, and the opposing side has to do a break test based on the modifier of the difference between them. If it is a tie, the side with a musician wins. by 1. If it's a tie and both sides put musicians, then it's a tie and both units stay in combat for next turn. So yeah, again, it gives us a bit more degree in combat and what happens there. It's going to be less likely that it's a tie every time. And like we said, break tests are quite a bit different as well. Because of the 3 different states of fleeing that we can have, it kind of rewards units that have got high leadership. So essentially you do your leadership test, again you've got the modifier based on what you've lost the combat by. If the result of the natural roll is higher than the unit's leadership, the unit breaks and flees. They run away, 2d6 inches, there's a chance that they get mowed down and murdered horribly. If the result of the natural roll is equal to or lower than the unit's leadership, but the modified result is higher, then the unit falls back in good order. So, I don't know, say we've got a unit's beaten in combat by 5. It's got leadership 7, and the unmodified roll is a 6. Awesome. Your modified result is obviously, way higher than that, but because you've rolled within your leadership, you fall back in good order. And this means that you fall back, and then you're automatically a rally, ready to turn round and either receive the charge from the pursuing unit, or set yourself up for the following turn. And then if the modified result is equal to or lower than the leadership, so in that example, say you rolled Snake Eyes, you just give ground. So your base is kind of just separated by a couple of inches, and you're still in the fight, ready to receive it. Most times the enemy will kind of pursue into you, ready to start a new round of combat. But I really like the 3 different flavours of fallback that you've got, because it makes it less disruptive to lose a fight. Now obviously if you've got a unit with terrible leadership, you probably are still going to flee, but those elite units aren't going to be so susceptible to having an unlucky charge done on them, which wipes out the front rank. They can't retaliate and then get cut down. That's less likely to happen, because what probably will happen is that you'll fall back in good order, ready to either receive the charge or go on the counter-offensive in your own turn. So it's a really, really good change that makes combat much more fun than it could be. And obviously you can pursue into units and cut them down. That's all the same. One interesting thing to note is that while you're kind of wheeling and moving around and stuff, you can actually move off the table, to do formations and stuff. It's not as if there's a massive wall around the edge of the board, which kind of limits where you can move. So that's something to bear in mind too. Now, panic tests still exist, and this is something that it's worth maybe bookmarking this page in your early few battles, because it's not something really that comes up in other modern Games Workshop games. So for example, if a unit's destroyed nearby a unit, those nearby units will have to do panic tests. If a unit is fled through, or a friend flees from combat, these are all things that can cause panic tests. And again, based on how many models in the unit are killed, determines whether they're falling back in good order or fleeing. Normally, if you've got more than half the unit, they're only going to fall back in good order, which means you're going to give a couple of inches to the enemy, but you're not running away. What you don't want to see happen is that a unit is destroyed, and then all the other units within 6 inches start failing their panic test too, and falling back, and your whole kind of battle line crumbles. You don't want to see that happen. Now, we'll talk about characters in a bit, but basically you can use the leadership of heroes within their command range. Now, their command range is equal to their leadership. However, generals and battle stand bearers have a range of 12 inches, so any models within 12 inches of those models get to use their leadership, which is handy for those tests. So, like we saw with the Horus Heresy, we get a whole host of universal special rules. Now, I will say that they are a lot easier to find and follow in the Old World than they were in Horus Heresy. Obviously, one of the problems with the Horus Heresy was that the rules were really split between the Astartes books and the core rulebook, because the core rulebook was finished first before the Astartes one does, and that's why we've kind of got that weird mix of special rules in both of them. Now, obviously, for the Old World, we haven't got that problem. All the universal special rules are within this book, and then you might have a couple of army-specific ones in your army lists, making it way easier to find them rather than flipping through 2 or 3 books in some cases, trying to find the rules that are relevant. Now a lot of these are, familiar stuff that we've seen before, so ethereal, you can only be hurt by magical weapons, for example, but a lot of these have changed in some way compared to previous editions of the game. So breath weapons is a good example. In 8th edition it was a once per game ability, now they can just do it all the time. Armour Bane's a really critical one. This is on a lot of units, we mentioned it earlier, and essentially on a wound of 6 you increase your AP. This is stackable, so if a weapon's got Armour Bane 2 and a unit's got Armour Bane 1, it would mean that on a roll of a 6 to wound, your AP would be increased by 3, making them particularly brutal against high armour targets. But yeah, there's lots of stuff on here that kind of gets the flavour of the army. So extra ranks we mentioned earlier allows them to fight in an additional rank. Normally that's on things like spears. We've got things such as Swift Stride we mentioned earlier, where you get an additional kind of d6 to your charge and an extra 3 inches on your charge distance. So yeah, lots of stuff in here. I think this is a really good way of doing it, and it makes certainly this book is a lot easier to follow those compared to stuff like the Horus Heresy. One that I want to shout out is Monster Slayer. This one's really cool. So it only works when you're fighting a monster, and on an unmodified wound of 6, that monster doesn't get a save, it doesn't get a regeneration save, it can attempt to make a single ward save if it's got one, otherwise it is slain. So this is cool that we'll see on like Slayers and the like, being able to one-shot dragons, which is really cool. But yeah, there's lots of rules here. Like I say, some of them are familiar, some of them have changed, so I would make sure that you kind of give this a proper thorough read to make sure you know what your units do. Especially since a lot of the upgrades in the books give you access to some of these special rules, and some of them are easily missed at first. So, Veteran, for example, being able to re-roll leadership tests but not break tests is very specific there. Where fear and terror, awesome, you get to re-roll them, but your break test you're still going to be subject to. So just make sure you kind of get all the nuances of them, and there's different flavours of rules that capture all that. The book then goes through kind of the other kind of more niche special rules. So for other formations that we can have, open orders, a different form of formation. It's very similar to the close order formation, but the main difference being that you don't get disrupted by moving into scenery, and also you get a free turn after moving as well. So it basically represents those troops being a little bit more agile and able to move around the battlefield a little bit easier. Skirmish works as it did as well. So you've got a loose formation, you've got to be within an inch of another model within your unit. You get to move without having a facing, you get to shoot where you like. One thing that it does call out though is that models within your own unit do block line of sight. So if you've got some skirmishing archers, you are still going to make sure that you've got line of sight to all your models. Also, skirmishers do not get any rank bonus in combat as well, so they can be quite penalised if they get charged by that. Skirmishers are really good for being able to disrupt charges and get in the way and flee, and maybe kind of try and draw out any frenzied units and the like. We then go through the unit types. Now obviously characters can join units. We've got the different flavours of infantry, monstrous infantry. We've seen all this earlier in the book, but again it's repeated here to show kind of what stuff that they can do, which is pretty cool. Chariots are very good. They kind of do impact hits. They do a lot of damage on the charge as opposed to kind of when they're stuck in combat. Command groups, obviously this is something that has been in old editions of Warhammer. Champions can take challenges, they can take magic items and magic weapons and stuff. They've often got higher stats than them. Standard bearers are really used to increase that combat resolution by 1 if you've got one. They also give away victory points though if they're lost. And musicians basically break any ties in combat, and also give you a modifier to your leadership, and you are more likely to be able to march when you're close to the enemy. Normally, if you're close to the enemy, you've got to do a leadership test in order to pass that. However, having a musician increases your leadership to do that, so they're quite handy there. As with previous editions of the game, it costs points in order to have your standard bearers, musicians and champions. This will vary by unit as well. For Rule of Cool, I often include these, but obviously if you're scrimping for points, you can often maybe omit these on some units that don't need to have them. We've talked about characters before. You've got like command range, essentially allowing you to use the leadership of these heroes in order to lead your other troops. Now, characters can join more or less any unit with a few restrictions. So an infantry unit can't join a unit of monstrous infantry, for example, because the hero on foot would be scared they'd be stood on by the monstrous infantry. But outside of that, it's a bit more free form, and there's been a lot of questions on base sizes and how things fit. If you can, you rank them up within the unit as normal. However, if they're on a bigger base, they simply go to the side. They still count as being in part of that unit. They're simply shifted over. So I've seen things about lizard men and slam mage priests being a different base size to temple guard and stuff. You'd simply put them on the side of the unit. It might not be as aesthetically pleasing, but from a rules point of view, it still works. You're still part of that unit. So don't worry about that one, because they can still join them. And yeah, it's a lot of stuff that you've seen before. You know, issuing challenges, refusing it, they don't get to fight in there. Overkill, if you manage to do a lot of wounds to a character in a challenge and kill it, you know, do excess wounds to it compared to what they've got on the profile, you get an additional modifier for your combat resolution as well. So another big section of the book is weapons, and there's a lot of weapons and lots of stuff that I think, you know, people are going to have a few games and then kind of weigh up what's good and what's worth taking. So we talked about great weapons earlier. They are very, very good weapons. Strength +2, AP -2, and they've got Armour Bane 1, which means on a roll of 6 that I turn to AP 3. Give it to a unit that's got an innate Armour Bane 2. You can maybe get that as high as AP 4, meaning it will tear through like any armour in the game. But obviously it requires 2 hands, so you can't use a shield with it. And it strikes last. So if you give that to a unit that's going to be charged, they're going to be initiative 1, and they are going to be fighting after whoever charges you. However, give it to a unit that's probably going to be on the charge, and you've got a good chance of going first, if not at the same time. So it's going to be very much weighing up what weapons do to get the benefit of it. And I really, really like that. We mentioned the split in spears earlier. So beastmen, for example, can be equipped with either throwing or thrusting. So you can equip them for their role of receiving charges or making charges. I think it makes the game a lot more interesting having this variety of different weapons. Majority of weapons are in here. Obviously some race specific ones are within the 2 army books as well. Armour again works much like it did in the old world. So light armour is 6+ save, heavy armour is a 5+ save, full plate armour is a 4+ save. You can have barding to increase that by 1, and you can have shields to increase that by 1 as well. So obviously the highest save that you could get, so someone in full plate armour on a barded steed with a shield, 2+ is the best armour they can get. So we can't get to silly like 1+ or 0+ armours that we have done in previous editions of the game. It makes it work a lot better. Some units have got a special rule that counts their armour as being higher than it is as well. On Dragon Ogres, I think off the top of my head, have got stuff like that. As ever, wizards can't wear armour. War machines work much like they did as well. So you've got bolt throwers, you've got cannons and stone throwers, with a lot of them using the artillery dice, and potentially bad things happening if you roll that misfire on the artillery dice. Cannons pretty much work exactly the same as they did in the back, so you know, you pick a point, you roll a dice to see where it lands, and then you roll the dice again to see how far it bounces. Again, you've got a chance of misfire there. On the initial shot, something bad could happen to your cannon. On the follow-up roll, it just means that the cannonball is plunged into the ground and it stayed there. And I remember playing for 8th edition, the consensus was always aim about 10 inches from the back of the unit, and you're probably going to hit them with the combination. But yeah, you've got to be careful that you don't overshoot the unit, or on the opposite, roll really low and undershoot it. So again, all this is very familiar. We get some really nice artwork of all the supported factions too. Now, like I say, we have got 2 books coming out alongside this, Forces of Fantasy and Ravening Hordes. One of them containing the good armies, and the other one containing the evil armies. And then each of these, over the course of the release, is going to get an arcane journal as well. And the arcane journal basically contains lore for that army, plus some alternate builds, plus some units that are encouraged to be converted. So for the Tomb Kings, obviously one of the armies in there is the Chariot Heavy Tomb Kings force, and there's a unit option in the Arcane Journal for taking Tomb Guard on a chariot, which is a really cool option. You can also take the snakes without the rider on as well, which is pretty cool. But yeah, lots of fun stuff, lots of old models returning in here as well. So I suspect that we'll see, obviously the initial release is just Bretonnia and Khemri, and I reckon every 3 months we might see a pair of armies with some model releases coming out alongside them. Yeah, really, really looking forward to seeing it. Now, I don't know if any terrain is going to get re-released for the Old World. I really hope that it does, because I've got a fortified manor house upstairs. I'd love to get another one. We do get some terrain rules in here though. A lot of it's fairly straightforward though. You know, hills allow you to shoot an additional rank, for example. We've got arcane monoliths and stuff that give you magic resistance. All the usual bits and bobs. There's no kind of call outs to any, you know, any hints that terrain's coming back in there, but hopefully it does. So I guess the big thing is how you build your army, and kind of what the average size of battle is. Now this calls out an average size of battle being between 2,000 and 3,000 points, but honestly the game works great at any points level. You could easily have a little 1,000-point game, or say if you and a friend picked up the Bretonnian box and the Khemri box and used the 1250 forces, they would also go great against each other. And army building is really quite, you know, simple. You've got your maximum points level you can build to. You have to have at least 3 units. You have to have the general, and then there's a breakdown of different percentages of units that you can take. These do vary a little bit in some of the army lists, but on the whole it's 50% can be characters, at least 25% has to be core, up to 50% special, up to 25% rare, up to 20% can be mercenaries, which obviously leaves the door open for the dogs of war and stuff coming out, and up to 25% can be allies. Each army will have an ally table showing the different levels of allegiance as well, because obviously some units might get on better than others. Some of them might be quite disruptive having in your army. Now on top of that, some units will also have limits on what you can take. So for Bretonnia, I think you can take 1 Duke per 1,000 points, for example, and in the Knight Errant list you have to take at least 1 unit of Knight Errants per 1,000 points. So there'll be some restrictions in there like that. This again, anyone who's played old editions of Warhammer will be used to this. It's quite nice. You kind of got your 25% core tax, and then you're really open to kind of add what you like as long as you stay within those percentages. So really, really like that. So yeah, really, really fun game. Now we get rules in here for playing both match play battles and narrative battles. One thing people have asked about is battlefield size. Now it does say that a normal battlefield is 6 foot by 4 foot, but it does also give some minimum sizes for people who haven't got the space. Maybe they're playing on a dining room table. These follow the sizes that have been in Age of Sigmar and 40k. So 30 by 44 for 1,000 points, 44 by 60 for 1,000 to 3,000 points, and 44 by 90 for any bigger battles. Those are just guidelines, and I think most people will use that 6 by 4 foot if they've got it. I wouldn't get too het up about, well, it says here that the minimum size is 44 by 60. Just use 6 by 4. It's you know, whatever surface that you've got available you'll be able to use. And in the grand scheme of things it isn't going to make much of a difference. I suspect tournaments will be 2,000 points at 6 by 4 foot board. But obviously people are free to do what they want, and it very much spells out this is your game, you know, play a big or small game as you want. The way most scenarios work is on victory points, so this is based on killing units or working out what units are fleeing or what units have been heavily injured over the course of the battle. You get extra victory points for killing the general, for capturing flags and stuff. Again, a lot of this is going to be very familiar to old school Warhammer Fantasy players. People who are looking for scenarios where you're standing on objectives and, you know, stuff that we see in AOS or 40k might be disappointed here, because it is very much about killing the opponent. But then this is a war game, so I suppose you'd expect that. We've seen a shift in the way kind of scenarios work in the more recent GW games since Warhammer Fantasy. So this takes it back to the basics. You're looking to destroy units, to capture flags, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, and as you'd expect, we get a number of different scenarios in here. So there's 6 scenarios in there, with a range of different deployment options and different gimmicks, like stuff coming on different flanks and the like, with, you know, some returning favourites that, you know, we've seen in previous editions of the game, such as the tower. In addition to this, we get some campaign rules on how to make kind of like splitting campaign battles, and we also get some narrative missions as well, and kind of rules for using a games master and kind of taking it to the next level. This is something I expect will get expanded upon in the future. We do get some narrative kind of missions in there as well, which is really, really cool. So yeah, final kind of chunk of the book goes through the laws of magic. Like I say, there's a number of different laws. Each of them has 6 spells. You roll randomly to generate, and then you can swap a spell for your signature spell or a spell from your own lore as well in your army book. So dead easy to do. Obviously this is before the Colleges of Magic as well, so magic is a little bit different than it was in Warhammer Fantasy. We also get the full kind of magic item lists in here as well. So again, if you've played a previous edition of the game, you know the drill here, but essentially your characters and champions can buy these to give them new weapons and abilities. There's a whole host of weapons and armour and banners, and these are going to get expanded further in Ravening Hordes and Forces of Fantasy as well. Each army list has their own list of magic items that they can take. So yeah, and then we get a nice little kind of summary and a full index. There's also, I'm going to hand, but there's also a reference sheet included in the box as well, which makes having that on the table to look up your key rules really, really useful. So yeah, that was a look at Warhammer The Old World. I'm going to be painting up the Bretonnians over the next few weeks, and I'm really looking forward to having them on the table. We're going to be doing some battle reports. We've got multiple old Warhammer Fantasy armies between us, so we're looking to film some battle reports to show kind of how the game works and you know, how the different factions work. Over on the website spruesandbrews.com as well, we're also going to be doing some faction focuses on some of the different armies as well, because I know you guys will be wanting to know how your army plays. But yeah, I think The Old World is awesome. We've played a few games now. They've been really, really fun, filled with nostalgia, but then also some things that they've changed and improved and made better. The big Bretonnian box for £155 I think is an absolute bargain. All the miniatures that you get in there. Like I say, both those boxes, the Khemri one's £175, I think that's £20 more. But the fact that you get a full 1,250 point army plus this core rulebook is really great for anyone who's maybe looking to start a new fantasy army and has not played Warhammer Fantasy before. Being able to get all of that in one box with the rules for those units too, I think is really, really cool. So yeah, check out The Old World. We have got a load of Old World content up on YouTube today, and a massive, I think it's about 7,000 page full deep dive written review over on spruesandbrews.com as well. So yeah, make sure to check that out. If you do want to support the site as well, give us a follow, subscribe, that'd be amazing. We've also got an affiliate link to Element Games in the description as well. Anything you get from there, we get a bit of a kickback, which helps to support the site. I think unfortunately Element haven't got an allotment for the Old World today, but over the coming weeks they should be coming back in stock. I think Old World has been super popular, so for day one, GW may be best shout for getting them. But yeah, until next time, we'll see you soon with more Old World content. Have a great weekend and enjoy playing with some square bases.